Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the last time you felt truly cold. Maybe walking to your car on a winter morning, or stepping outside without a jacket. Now multiply that chill by 10. Strip away your heated home, your warm bed, your electric blankets. Remove every comfort you've ever known about nighttime. You're standing in a world where winter doesn't just bite, it kills. Where darkness lasts 16 hours, and the only thing between you and death is firelight flickering against cave walls. This is the world of our ancestors 40,000 years ago, when falling asleep meant gambling with your life. But here's what will surprise you. They didn't just survive those nights. They found ways to rest deeply, to dream, to build the very foundations of human comfort in the heart of impossible cold. Tonight, you'll discover how they turned caves into sanctuaries, how they used mammoth hides as blankets, and how families pressed together became living furnaces against the ice. You'll learn why their sleep might have been deeper than yours, despite wolves prowling outside their doors. Why children slept at the center of fur piles, while adults rotated through the night, feeding fires that meant the difference between dawn and death. And you'll understand how those long, dark winter nights didn't just test human survival. They forged the very bonds that made us who we are. This is the story of sleep when sleep was survival, when dreams were born in firelight and warmth was something you created together, one breath at a time. 40,000 years ago, winter was a beast that devoured the unprepared. In Ice Age Europe, temperatures plunged to levels that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Snow blanketed the earth for months at a time. The sun, when it appeared at all, cast only a pale, weak light before vanishing again into an endless night. But this wasn't just any cold. This was the kind of cold that stopped your breath mid-air and turned it into ice crystals. The kind that made your bones ache deep inside your body. Without modern clothing, without insulated homes, without any of the technologies we take for granted, our ancestors faced each nightfall, knowing it might be their last. Picture yourself standing at the mouth of a limestone cave as dusk approaches. The wind carries the scent of snow and something else, something wild and dangerous. In the distance, you hear the haunting howl of wolves, closer than you'd like. Behind you, deeper in the cave, a small fire flickers. Your family waits there, wrapped in the hides of animals they hunted weeks ago. This was reality for Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. Every sunset brought the same life or death question. Would they wake up when dawn finally came? The darkness itself was unlike anything we can imagine today. No streetlights, no glow from distant cities, no phone screens to break the black. When night fell, it fell completely. The only sources of light were fire, the moon when clouds permitted, and the cold shimmer of stars. In that darkness, every sound became magnified. Every shadow held potential threat. Yet somehow, in this world that seems designed to kill, humans found ways to sleep. Not just survive the night, but actually rest. They discovered that warmth could be created, that safety could be built, that comfort was possible even when death lurked just beyond the firelight. The key was understanding that sleep wasn't a luxury, it was survival technology. A well-rested hunter could track prey more effectively. A family that slept deeply could heal from injuries faster. Children who felt safe at night grew stronger and more resilient. Sleep wasn't time stolen from survival efforts. Sleep was survival. But how did they do it? How did our ancestors turn freezing caves into places of rest? How did they create warmth in a world made of ice? The answers lie in their ingenious adaptations, their deep understanding of fire and fur, and most importantly, in their recognition that no one survives winter alone. As we journey deeper into their world, you'll discover that caveman sleep wasn't primitive or crude. It was sophisticated, strategic, and surprisingly comfortable. These weren't desperate people clinging to life in misery. They were engineers of comfort, masters of warmth, creators of the first bedrooms in human history. The night is falling on the Ice Age world. Let's step inside their caves and discover how they transformed darkness into dreams. Not all caves were created equal. When winter approached, choosing the right sleeping spot meant the difference between comfort and catastrophe. Our ancestors weren't randomly stumbling into the first hole they found. They were real estate experts, evaluating each potential shelter with the sharp eye of someone whose life depended on getting it right. Location was everything. The ideal cave faced away from prevailing winds, protecting the entrance from icy blasts that could snuff out fires and steal precious warmth. It needed to be high enough to avoid flooding when spring melt arrived, but not so high that climbing to it in winter became treacherous. The entrance had to be large enough for people to enter easily, but small enough to retain heat and keep large predators at bay. Inside, the cave needed natural ventilation, cracks or openings that would draw smoke upward and out, preventing the suffocation that could come from poorly ventilated fires. But not too much ventilation, or the warmth would escape as quickly as it was created. The floor had to be relatively level and dry, elevated above any potential water seepage. Once they found the perfect cave, the real work began. The floor, cold stone that would steal body heat in minutes, needed transformation. Our ancestors became master bedding engineers, layering materials with the precision of modern mattress designers. First came the foundation layer, dried grasses, sedges, and pine needles gathered during the brief autumn window before snow made collection impossible. Archaeological sites in South Africa show evidence of bedding layers nearly 200,000 years old. These weren't random piles of vegetation. They were carefully selected plants, often including species with natural insect-repelling properties. Imagine the knowledge this required. Someone had to discover that certain grasses stayed drier than others. Someone had to notice that pine needles not only provided cushioning, but also released oils that kept fleas and lice away. This was an accident. It was applied botany, passed down through generations of winter survivors. Over the plant layer went animal hides, carefully prepared during warmer months. These weren't just thrown down haphazardly. The largest, thickest hides, mammoth, bison, bear, formed the base layer, providing insulation from the stone floor. Softer furs were layered on top, creating a sleeping surface that was both warm and comfortable. The preparation of these hides was an art form. Using sharp stone scrapers, families would spend hours cleaning fat and tissue from fresh pelts. The hides were then stretched, dried, and sometimes smoked to preserve them and make them more pliable. A well-prepared hide could last multiple seasons, becoming softer and more comfortable with use. Fire placement was critical. Too close to the sleeping area, and sparks could ignite the carefully prepared bedding. Too far away, and the heat wouldn't reach the sleepers. Archaeological evidence from caves across Europe shows hearth locations that were strategically positioned, usually in the center of the living space, where heat could radiate evenly to all corners. The sleeping arrangements themselves were masterpieces of thermal engineering. Families didn't scatter randomly across their cave bedroom. Children, who lost body heat faster than adults, were placed in the center of the group, where they could benefit from the warmth of bodies on all sides. Adults arranged themselves around the edges, their larger bodies forming a protective barrier that trapped heat inside the group. Even the bedding was arranged strategically. The heaviest furs covered the group like blankets, while lighter pelts served as pillows and individual wraps. Nothing was wasted. Even scraps of fur too small for bedding were stuffed into gaps in cave walls to block drafts. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect of cave bedroom design was the ash layer. Beneath the plant bedding, families would sometimes spread a thin layer of wood ash. This served multiple purposes. It repelled insects, absorbed moisture, and even provided a small amount of additional insulation. When the bedding became soiled or infested, the ash made it easy to burn the old materials and start fresh. These weren't crude accommodations. They were thoughtfully designed sleeping systems that maximized comfort, safety, and warmth. Every element served multiple purposes. Every placement was intentional. Every choice was informed by generations of hard-won knowledge. As we'll discover next, the centerpiece of every cave bedroom was the element that made all of this possible: fire. Fire was more than warmth. It was life itself, contained in dancing flames that held back the darkness and everything that lurked within it. Without fire, all the furs and bedding in the world couldn't save you from an Ice Age winter. With it, a freezing cave became a sanctuary, a place where humans could not just survive, but thrive. The relationship between fire and sleep was intimate and complex. Fire provided the heat that made rest possible, but it also demanded constant attention. Flames could die if neglected, but they could also rage out of control if fed too generously. Managing this balance became one of the most crucial skills of prehistoric life. Building a fire for sleep was different from building one for cooking. The goal wasn't intense heat, but sustained, gentle warmth that would last through the long night. This required understanding the burning properties of different materials, which woods burned hot and fast, which provided steady, long-lasting coals. Oak and other hardwoods were prized for their long, slow burn. Pine and other resinous woods were avoided for nighttime fires because they burned too quickly and threw dangerous sparks. When wood was scarce, our ancestors burned whatever they could find: bones, dried dung, even bundles of grass. In the mammoth-rich steppes of Siberia, entire fires were fueled by mammoth bones, which burned slowly and provided steady heat. The placement of the fire within the sleeping area was a masterpiece of physics. Too close to the cave wall and the smoke wouldn't draft properly. Too close to the sleeping area and the heat would be overwhelming. The perfect spot was usually in the center of the cave, where the heat could radiate in all directions and the smoke could rise naturally toward cracks in the ceiling. But fire wasn't just a heater. It was a guardian. The light kept nocturnal predators at bay. Wolves, bears, and big cats all had healthy respect for flames. A well-maintained fire created a boundary that predators rarely crossed, turning the cave into a safe zone where humans could relax their constant vigilance. The psychological effects of fire were perhaps just as important as the physical ones. In a world of endless darkness, the warm glow of flames provided comfort that went beyond temperature. The flickering light was mesmerizing, naturally inducing the drowsy state that leads to sleep. The crackling sounds were soothing white noise that masked potentially alarming sounds from outside. Fire also extended the useful hours of the day. By firelight, tools could be repaired, stories could be told, and bonds could be strengthened. This social time before sleep was crucial for group cohesion. Families used these precious hours to share the events of the day, plan for tomorrow's activities, and pass down the knowledge. That meant survival. Maintaining the fire through the night required a rotation system. Someone always had to be awake, ready to add fuel when the flames began to die. This wasn't a burden shared equally. Pregnant women, young children, and the sick were excused from fire duty. Instead, it rotated among the healthy adults, usually in shifts of a few hours. The person on fire duty wasn't just a guard. They were the night's lifeline. They watched for changes in the weather, listened for approaching predators, and made sure the precious flames never died completely. When their shift ended, they would gently wake their replacement, usually with a quiet touch rather than words that might disturb the sleeping group. The fuel for these fires was precious and had to be gathered strategically. During autumn, families would spend days collecting and storing dry wood, often carrying it into their caves in quantities that could last weeks. Kindling, small twigs, dried grasses, birch bark, was especially valuable and was hoarded like treasure. Starting a fire from scratch in the middle of a winter night was nearly impossible, so the goal was to never let it die completely. Coals could be banked under ash, remaining hot for hours with minimal fuel. This technique, known as banking the fire, allowed the night watch to keep flames alive with minimal effort while most of the group slept. The relationship with fire was so intimate that many archaeologists believe it shaped human evolution itself. The longer evening hours made possible by firelight gave our ancestors time for complex social interactions. The need to maintain fires through the night may have contributed to the human ability to wake frequently without losing the benefits of sleep. Fire wasn't just technology. It was the beating heart of prehistoric life. It turned caves into homes, darkness into safety, and isolation into community. As the flames danced on the cave walls, casting shadows that flickered and moved like living things, our ancestors found something that no other creature possessed: the ability to carry the sun's warmth into the deepest night. But fire alone wasn't enough. To truly conquer winter sleep, they needed another crucial element: the sophisticated insulation systems that came from the animals they hunted. The mammoth's hide was thick as a book and heavy as a small tree. When our ancestors brought down one of these giants, they didn't just see meat for weeks. They saw blankets that could keep an entire family warm through the cruelest winter. But not all animal skins were equal in the fight against cold, and choosing the wrong fur could mean the difference between a warm night's sleep and a frozen death. Reindeer hide was the crown jewel of Ice Age bedding. The secret lay in the structure of the hair itself, hollow shafts that trapped warm air like tiny insulation chambers. A reindeer pelt could keep you warm in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human. Hours. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia still prize reindeer fur today for exactly the same reasons their Ice Age ancestors did. But obtaining these perfect blankets was only the beginning. The raw hide straight from a kill was stiff, smelly, and would rot within days if not properly treated. Transforming it into warm, flexible bedding required knowledge that took generations to perfect. The process began immediately after the hunt. Using sharp flint scrapers, every scrap of fat and flesh had to be removed from the hide. This wasn't just about cleanliness. Leftover organic matter would putrefy, making the hide unusable. The scraping had to be thorough but gentle. Too aggressive, and you'd create holes that would tear larger under stress. Next came the stretching. The cleaned hide was lashed to a wooden frame or pegged to the ground, pulled tight to prevent shrinkage as it dried. This step determined the final size and shape of the finished product. A well-stretched mammoth hide could cover an entire family sleeping area, while smaller pelts were shaped for individual use. The smoking process was perhaps the most crucial step. Hides were suspended over smoldering fires fed with specific types of wood and plants. The smoke didn't just preserve the hide, it made it supple, water-resistant, and naturally insect-repelling. Archaeological evidence suggests that different regions developed their own smoking recipes, using local plants to achieve the best results. Some hides received additional treatments. Brain tanning, where the animal's own brain tissue was worked into the hide, created incredibly soft, flexible leather. This process required skill, timing, and strong stomachs, but produced pelts so comfortable they could serve as clothing by day and blankets by night. The layering system our ancestors developed was worthy of modern sleeping bag designers. The base layer consisted of the heaviest, thickest hides, mammoth, bison, or cave bear. These provided the primary insulation barrier between bodies and the cold cave floor. Their weight also helped trap warm air in the layers above. The middle layer used medium-weight pelts from animals like deer, elk, or horse. These provided warmth without excessive weight and could be arranged to cover specific parts of the body. Extra thickness over the core where vital organs needed protection, thinner coverage over arms and legs where mobility was important. The top layer was where comfort met function. Soft fox, rabbit, or ermine pelts felt luxurious against the skin while providing the final barrier against heat loss. These delicate furs were often reserved for children and pregnant women whose need for warmth outweighed concerns about wear. But the true genius lay in the system's adaptability. On moderately cold nights, fewer layers were used. As temperatures dropped, more pelts were added to the pile. Individual family members could add or remove their personal furs based on their own warmth needs. The system could expand to accommodate visitors or contract for smaller groups. The edges of sleeping areas were lined with the longest-haired furs available. Wolf pelts, with their thick winter coats, were perfect for this purpose. They created a barrier that trapped warm air around the sleeping group while providing protection from drafts that might sneak under the main covering. Maintenance of this fur library was a constant task. Hides had to be shaken out regularly to prevent pest infestations. They needed to be aired and re-smoked periodically to maintain their water resistance. Damaged areas had to be repaired quickly before small tears became large holes. The value of a well-prepared fur was immense. A single reindeer hide, properly treated, could mean the difference between life and death for a family. These weren't just possessions. They were lifelines, treasured and protected with the same care we might give to precious heirlooms. Families developed preferences and specialties. Some became known for their skill with mammoth hides, others for their ability to create incredibly soft fox pelts. This knowledge was passed down through generations, with children learning the complex processes by watching and helping their elders. The sophistication of these prehistoric blanket systems rivals modern outdoor gear. Layer by layer, they created insulation that could keep humans warm in conditions that would challenge our best winter equipment. But staying warm was only part of the challenge. To truly master winter sleep, they had to solve an even more complex problem: how to share that precious warmth efficiently among the group. In the mathematics of Ice Age survival, 1 + 1 equaled much more than 2. A single human body, no matter how well wrapped in furs, was a losing battle against winter's cruel arithmetic. But two bodies pressed together created a microclimate of warmth that could sustain both. 3 bodies were even better. An entire family, arranged correctly, became a human furnace capable of generating enough heat to survive the night. This wasn't about affection, though affection surely grew from it. This was about physics. The human body produces heat constantly, roughly 100 watts at rest, about the same as a bright light bulb. But that heat dissipates quickly in cold air, radiating away from the skin and leaving the body to burn precious calories to maintain core temperature. When bodies pressed together, they shared this heat production while minimizing heat loss. The surface area exposed to cold air decreased dramatically. Two people spooning under furs had half the exposed surface area of two people sleeping separately. The warm air trapped between them created an insulation layer that was far more effective than any animal pelt. But the arrangement of bodies wasn't random. Our ancestors developed sophisticated positioning strategies that maximized warmth while ensuring everyone could sleep comfortably. Children, who lost body heat faster than adults due to their higher surface area to mass ratio, were placed in the center of the group. They became the warm core around which the family arranged itself. Adults positioned themselves around the children like the petals of a flower. The largest, most heat-producing adults took the outside positions, serving as thermal barriers that protected the smaller bodies within. Pregnant women, whose bodies were already working harder to maintain two lives, were given prime positions near the center where they could benefit from maximum shared warmth. Elderly family members presented a special challenge. Their aging bodies produced less heat and were more vulnerable to cold, but they often couldn't sleep comfortably with too much weight pressing against them. The solution was to place them near the fire, where they could benefit from radiant heat, while still keeping them connected to the family's warmth network through strategic positioning of furs and light contact with other bodies. The sleeping positions themselves were carefully choreographed. The fetal position, with knees drawn up and arms wrapped around the torso, minimized the body's surface area and conserved heat. But within the family group, people modified this position to maximize contact with others. Side sleeping with bodies curved together like nesting spoons was common, allowing maximum skin contact while still permitting comfortable breathing. Back-to-back sleeping was another favorite arrangement, especially between adults. This position allowed each person to retain some personal space while sharing the significant heat that radiates from the back and shoulders. It also meant that each person faced outward from the group, providing an additional layer of security against potential threats. The role of early domesticated wolves, the ancestors of our dogs, was crucial in these sleeping arrangements. These proto-dogs were essentially four-legged heaters, their thick fur and higher body temperature making them valuable sleeping companions. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans and wolves began sharing sleeping spaces long before full domestication occurred. A large wolf could provide as much warmth as an additional adult, but with several advantages. Wolves were naturally alert to danger even while resting, their keen senses providing an early warning system for the sleeping humans. Their fur provided natural insulation that complemented human-made bedding. And unlike human companions, wolves never hogged the covers. The arrangement of the group also had to accommodate the practical needs of nightlife. Pregnant women and elderly individuals who might need to relieve themselves during the night were positioned near the edge of the group where they could exit without disturbing others. The person responsible for tending the fire was placed where they could easily reach the hearth without stepping over other sleepers. Managing this complex human puzzle required social skills as well as thermal engineering. Personal preferences had to be balanced against survival needs. Someone who snored might be positioned where their noise wouldn't keep others awake. Restless sleepers might be given edge positions where their movement wouldn't disturb the group. Children who were afraid of the dark stayed close to adults who could provide comfort. The intimacy of these sleeping arrangements created bonds that went far beyond mere survival. Families who had slept, pressed together through winter, developed an almost telepathic awareness of each other's needs and moods. They could sense when someone was cold, uncomfortable, or afraid without being told. This emotional intimacy was one of the unexpected benefits of physical proximity. Privacy, as we understand it today, was impossible in these arrangements. Every movement, every sound, every bodily function was shared with the group. But this lack of privacy created its own form of safety. No one suffered alone, no one faced the night without support, and no one's distress went unnoticed. The morning untangling of the family sleeping arrangement was a daily ritual. Bodies had to be carefully separated without exposing anyone to sudden cold. Furs had to be rearranged to maintain warmth as people gradually awakened. The fire had to be built up to provide heat as the shared body warmth of the night was dispersed. This system of shared warmth wasn't just a survival strategy, it was the foundation of human social structure. Children who grew up sleeping in family groups learned from birth that survival depended on cooperation, that individual comfort sometimes had to be sacrificed for group welfare, and that the most basic human need, sleep, was something that could only be safely satisfied together. But even the warmest family group couldn't relax completely. Winter nights brought dangers that no amount of shared body heat could ward off. Someone always had to stay awake, watching and listening for threats that could destroy the peaceful scene in moments. Sleep made you vulnerable. In those few hours of unconsciousness, you couldn't see predators approaching, couldn't hear the crackle of fire dying, couldn't feel the temperature dropping to dangerous levels. For Ice Age humans, closing their eyes required an act of faith. Faith that someone else was staying awake to keep the darkness at bay. The Night Watch wasn't a formal military guard, but it was just as vital. Through every hour of the night, someone in the group remained alert, tending the fire, listening for danger, and ready to wake the others if threats emerged. This rotation of responsibility turned individual vulnerability into collective strength. The primary duty of the Night Watch was maintaining the fire. Flames required constant attention, too little fuel, and they died. Too much, and they flared dangerously. The person on watch became intimately familiar with their fire's personality, learning to read the signs that indicated when fresh fuel was needed. The color of the flames, the sound of the burning, the feel of the heat on their face, all told a story about the fire's health. Adding fuel to a nighttime fire was an art form. Large logs could burn for hours, but took time to catch fully. Small kindling burned quickly, but provided immediate heat. Bones burned slowly and steadily, but required careful positioning to maintain airflow. The night watchman became a fuel manager, balancing the fire's immediate needs against the limited supply of combustible materials. But fire tending was only part of the job. The night watch served as the group's senses, extended into the darkness beyond their shelter. Human hearing was limited compared to many predators, but in the silence of winter nights, even small sounds carried far. The crunch of snow under padded feet, the scrape of claws on stone, the rustle of bushes being pushed aside. All were warning signs that required investigation. The challenge was distinguishing between harmless sounds and genuine threats. Wind could create noise that mimicked footsteps. Small animals moving through the underbrush could sound like larger predators. Ice cracking and shifting produced sounds that could startle the most experienced night guard. Learning to read these acoustic signals correctly was a skill that developed over years of practice. Predator behavior patterns were crucial knowledge for night watch duty. Wolves typically hunted in packs and could be heard communicating with howls and yips. Cave lions were usually solitary, but nearly silent in their approach. Hyenas were bolder than other predators and more likely to test human defenses. Understanding these behavioral differences helped the Night Watch respond appropriately to different threats. The early domesticated wolves that lived alongside human groups were invaluable partners in Night Watch duties. Their superior senses could detect approaching dangers long before human sentries. A subtle change in a dog's posture, the direction of its ears, or a low growl could alert the Night Watch to threats they couldn't yet perceive themselves. The rotation of watch duties required careful planning. Someone exhausted from a long day of hunting might not be alert enough for Night Watch. Pregnant women and nursing mothers were usually excused from watch duty since their sleep was already frequently interrupted. Children were too young for the responsibility, and elderly family members might not have the physical capabilities to respond to emergencies. This meant that the burden of Night Watch usually fell on healthy adults, rotating the duty to prevent any one person from becoming dangerously sleep-deprived. A typical rotation might involve 3 or 4 adults sharing the night, each taking a watch of 3 to 4 hours. The early evening watch was often given to someone who was naturally alert at that time, while the pre-dawn watch went to early risers. Communication between watch shifts had to be handled carefully. Waking your replacement without disturbing the sleeping group required subtle techniques, a gentle touch, a quiet whisper, perhaps a prearranged signal. The outgoing watchman would brief their replacement on any significant events, unusual sounds, changes in weather, the condition of the fire, or any concerns about the group's welfare. The psychological aspects of night watch duty were as challenging as the physical ones. Sitting alone in the darkness, responsible for everyone's safety, could be terrifying. The mind played tricks in the flickering firelight, creating shapes and movement where none existed. The weight of responsibility could be overwhelming. One mistake, one moment of inattention could cost lives. Yet the night watch also provided quiet time for reflection and observation. Many of humanity's first astronomers may have been night guards who spent hours studying the stars. Stories and songs might have been composed during these solitary hours. The rhythm of night sounds, wind, water, distant animal calls, could be deeply meditative. When threats did materialize, the night watch had to make split-second decisions, wake the group for a false alarm and disrupt everyone's crucial rest, fail to wake them for a real threat and risk disaster. The decision often came down to experience and instinct, qualities that developed over years of winter survival. The weapons available to a night watchman were limited, but effective. A burning branch from the fire could serve as both light source and weapon, extending the fire's protective barrier. Spears were always within reach, though their effectiveness in darkness was limited. Most importantly, the watchman's voice could raise an alarm that would instantly mobilize the entire group. The night watch system created a rhythm of shared responsibility that extended far beyond simple guard duty. It reinforced the idea that survival was a group effort, that individual rest depended on collective vigilance. Children grew up understanding that safety came from mutual care, that someone was always looking out for them even when they were most vulnerable. This system of rotating night watch may have been one of humanity's first steps toward complex social organization. It required trust, coordination, and the subordination of individual needs to group welfare. These are the same qualities that would later enable humans to build societies, cities, and civilizations. But of all the members of the group that the night watch protected, none were more precious or vulnerable than the children. Their survival required special arrangements, extra protection, and the fierce dedication of adults who understood that children were the future of their small band. In the brutal arithmetic of Ice Age survival, children were both the most precious and most vulnerable members of any group. Their small bodies lost heat faster than adults. They needed more sleep, but were more easily frightened awake. They required protection, but couldn't contribute to their own defense. Every night, families faced the challenge of keeping these fragile lives safe through hours of darkness and cold. The positioning of children during sleep was a masterpiece of protective strategy. Like the most valuable treasures, children were placed at the center of the family sleeping arrangement, surrounded on all sides by adult bodies. This wasn't just about warmth, though that was crucial. It was about creating layers of protection. Any threat would have to get through multiple adults before reaching a child. The smallest children, infants and toddlers, often slept directly on top of their mothers, sharing body heat and benefiting from the natural rhythm of breathing that could help regulate their own sleep cycles. This skin-to-skin contact provided temperature regulation, emotional comfort, and immediate access to nursing when needed. Slightly older children were nestled between parents or trusted adults, creating human cocoons of warmth and safety. The adults' bodies served as both heaters and shields, while their familiar presence helped chase away the fears that could keep children awake. In a world where nightmares could be prophetic warnings of real dangers, the comfort of adult protection was essential for peaceful sleep. The furs used for children were specially selected. The softest pelts, fox, rabbit, ermine, were reserved for young skin that could be irritated by coarser materials. These luxury furs weren't just comfort items, they were survival gear. A child who couldn't sleep due to scratchy bedding was a child who wouldn't grow properly, wouldn't heal from daily injuries, and wouldn't have the energy to keep up with the group's movements. Feeding children before sleep was a critical part of the nighttime routine. Young bodies burned through calories quickly, especially when fighting cold. A well-fed child slept more soundly and maintained body temperature more effectively throughout the night. This often meant that adults would sacrifice portions of their own meals to ensure children had enough fat and protein to fuel their internal furnaces. The challenge of nighttime bathroom needs for children required creative solutions. Chamber pots were unknown, and leaving the shelter's warmth for natural relief could be life-threatening on the coldest nights. Families developed systems using animal bladders or leather containers that could be used within the sleeping area, then emptied and cleaned the next day. Sick children presented even greater challenges. Fever could make a child too hot to sleep comfortably with others, but isolation meant dangerous heat loss. The solution often involved positioning the sick child between the sleeping area and the fire, where they could benefit from radiant heat while being monitored constantly by adults who could adjust their position or covering as needed. The sounds of children's sleep became part of the night's rhythm. Parents learned to distinguish between normal sleep sounds and signs of distress. A child's cough could indicate illness that needed immediate attention. Restless movement might mean they were too cold, too hot, or experiencing bad dreams that required comfort. The ability to read these subtle signals in darkness by touch and sound alone was a crucial parenting skill. Nightmares and fear of the dark were as real for Ice Age children as they are today. Perhaps more so given the genuine dangers that lurked in the darkness. Parents developed ways to comfort frightened children without fully waking them or disturbing other sleepers. Gentle humming, soft stroking, or whispered reassurances could often calm a child back to peaceful sleep. The stories told around the fire before bedtime served multiple purposes for children. Entertainment was the least important. These stories were education disguised as bedtime tales, lessons about which animals were dangerous, which plants were safe to eat, how to read weather signs, and why staying close to family was essential for survival. The repetition of these stories, night after night, embedded crucial survival knowledge deep in children's memories. But the harsh reality was that not all children survived the winter nights. Infant mortality was tragically high in the Ice Age world. Parents went to sleep every night, knowing that their child's survival depended not just on their vigilance, but on factors beyond their control: the severity of the weather, the availability of food, the presence of disease, the accidents that could befall any small person in a dangerous world. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age burial sites shows the profound grief that accompanied child loss. Small bodies were buried with care, often accompanied by tools, ornaments, or favorite objects. These graves tell us that even in a world where death was common, the loss of a child was devastating. The tenderness shown in these ancient burials reveals parents who loved their children just as deeply as we love ours today. Yet for all the risks and challenges, many children did survive. They grew up in the warm cocoon of family protection, learning through observation and participation how to master the skills they would need as adults. The children who made it through those dangerous nights became the carriers of their people's knowledge, the links between one generation and the next. The protection of children during winter nights shaped human social development in profound ways. It reinforced the idea that the group's most vulnerable members deserved the greatest protection. It created bonds between adults and children that went beyond biological relationships. Anyone who helped keep a child safe through the night became part of that child's extended family. Children who grew up sleeping in the center of protective family arrangements learned lessons about trust, cooperation, and mutual responsibility that would serve them throughout their lives. They understood from their earliest memories that survival was a group effort, that individual safety depended on collective care, and that the strong had an obligation to protect the weak. But even with all their protective strategies, Ice Age families couldn't rely on the same solutions year after year. Different human groups developed different approaches to winter survival, and understanding these variations reveals the diversity of strategies our ancestors used to master the art of cold weather sleep. Two human species walked the earth during the harshest Ice Age winters, and their approaches to nighttime survival were as different as their bodies. Neanderthals, with their stocky frames and barrel chests, were living furnaces built by evolution for cold climates. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, were taller and leaner, African bodies trying to survive in European winters through ingenuity rather than biology. These physical differences shaped everything about how each species approached sleep. A Neanderthal child, with their naturally higher muscle mass and shorter limbs, could retain body heat more efficiently than a Homo sapiens child of the same age. This meant Neanderthal families could spread out slightly more during sleep, while Homo sapiens had to huddle closer together to achieve the same warmth. Neanderthal sleeping arrangements showed their confidence in their bodies' heating abilities. Archaeological sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq reveal sleeping areas that were more spacious, with hearths positioned further from the bedding areas. Their robust physiques could handle greater distances from the fire source. Individual sleeping spots were larger, suggesting they could maintain warmth even with less body-to-body contact. But Neanderthals paid a price for their cold-adapted bodies. Their massive frames required enormous amounts of food to fuel their internal furnaces. A hungry Neanderthal lost body heat faster than a well-fed one, making regular meals crucial for nighttime survival. When food was scarce, their biological advantages could become disadvantages, their large bodies burning through limited calories at alarming rates during the long winter nights. Homo sapiens compensated for their less cold-adapted bodies with superior technology and social organization. They developed more sophisticated bedding systems, layering furs with greater precision. They built more elaborate shelters. The famous mammoth bone huts of Ukraine were likely Homo sapiens constructions, engineered marvels that maximized heat retention while minimizing fuel consumption. The social aspects of sleep revealed even greater differences between the species. Neanderthal groups were typically smaller, often just extended families of 15 to 20 individuals. Their sleeping arrangements reflected this intimacy. Tight family clusters arranged around central fires. Everyone knew everyone, and the nighttime protection system relied on blood relationships and long familiarity. Homo sapiens, by contrast, lived in larger, more fluid social groups. Their sleeping arrangements had to accommodate not just family members, but also allies, trading partners, and temporary group members. This required more flexible bedding systems and more complex social protocols for sharing warmth and protection. The fire management strategies of each species also differed significantly. Neanderthals, with their smaller groups and more energy-efficient bodies, could maintain smaller fires. Archaeological evidence shows their hearths were often simpler, circular pits with minimal modification. Their fire-tending rotations involved fewer people, but perhaps longer individual shifts. Homo sapiens developed more elaborate fire management systems. Multiple hearths were common in their larger settlements, with different fires serving different purposes: cooking fires, heating fires, even ceremonial fires. Their night watch systems were more complex, involving coordinated rotations among numerous adults and even early warning systems using domesticated wolves. The different approaches to child protection reflected each species' survival strategies. Neanderthal children, with their more robust bodies, could survive with slightly less intensive heating arrangements. They slept in family groups, but didn't require the extreme central positioning that Homo sapiens children needed. Homo sapiens children were more vulnerable to cold and required more elaborate protection systems. The multi-layered family sleeping arrangements, with children at the absolute center surrounded by multiple rings of adults, were probably Homo sapiens innovations born from the harsh reality that their offspring were more fragile than their Neanderthal counterparts. The cave selection preferences of each species told their own story. Neanderthals often chose deeper caves that provided maximum protection from wind and weather. They could tolerate the poorer ventilation that came with deep cave living because their smaller groups produced less smoke and their robust physiques handled air quality issues better. Homo sapiens showed greater flexibility in shelter selection, adapting to caves, rock overhangs, and constructed shelters with equal skill. They were more willing to accept ventilation challenges in exchange for strategic advantages, caves near water sources, or elevated positions that provided security from predators and flooding. Perhaps most significantly, the two species differed in their adaptability to changing conditions. Neanderthals had evolved perfect solutions for stable Ice Age conditions. Their bodies and behaviors were precisely calibrated for the cold European climate they had inhabited for hundreds of thousands of years. But when conditions changed, when climate shifted or new challenges emerged, their specialized adaptations became limitations. Homo sapiens, with their more flexible approach to winter survival, could modify their strategies more quickly. They could experiment with new shelter designs, try different bedding arrangements, and adapt their social systems to changing circumstances. The archaeological record suggests that these differences in sleep strategy may have played a role in the eventual dominance of Homo sapiens. While Neanderthals were better adapted to specific conditions, Homo sapiens were better at adapting to change. As the Ice Age waned and conditions shifted, flexibility became more valuable than specialization. Yet both species succeeded in their own ways, surviving tens of thousands of brutal winters through their different approaches to nighttime survival. The Neanderthal strategy of biological optimization worked magnificently for stable conditions. The Homo sapiens approach of technological and social innovation proved more durable over the long term. Understanding these differences reminds us that there was no single, correct way to survive Ice Age winters. Different solutions worked for different peoples in different times and places. But regardless of species, all successful approaches shared certain common elements: the use of fire, the importance of insulation, and the critical role of social cooperation in making sleep safe. The legacy of these ancient strategies lives on in our modern sleep habits, but perhaps nowhere more clearly than in our relationship with natural light and darkness, and how the rhythms of day and night shaped the very foundations of human rest. Before electric lights turned night into artificial day, human sleep followed rhythms as ancient and reliable as the tides. Our Ice Age ancestors lived by a clock that modern civilization has almost forgotten: the natural rise and fall of the sun, moon, and stars. Their sleep wasn't governed by work schedules or television programs, but by the deep biological rhythms that had evolved over millions of years. In winter, this natural clock created a schedule that would seem impossible to most people today. Sunset might come as early as 3 p.m., plunging the world into darkness that wouldn't lift until 10 a.m. the next day. 19 hours of night, 5 hours of dim daylight. This was the reality that shaped prehistoric sleep patterns. But rather than fighting these extremes, our ancestors embraced them. Their bodies naturally produced more melatonin during the extended darkness, creating a sleep drive that modern people can barely imagine. Without artificial light to suppress this hormone, they experienced deep, natural drowsiness that made falling asleep effortless despite the dangers surrounding them. The sleep that resulted wasn't the single 8-hour block that we consider normal today. Instead, it followed what researchers call a segmented or biphasic pattern that may be more natural to human biology than our modern approach. People would fall asleep soon after dark, sleep deeply for several hours, then wake naturally around midnight for a period of quiet activity. This midnight waking wasn't considered insomnia or a sleep problem. It was expected and planned for. Families used these quiet hours for intimate conversation, meditation, prayer, or gentle activities that could be performed by firelight. It was during these peaceful interludes that many of the deepest bonds were formed, stories shared, and cultural knowledge passed down. The person on night watch duty often used these midnight hours for companionship, sharing observations about the weather, discussing plans for the next day, or simply enjoying human connection in the protective circle of firelight. Children who woke during these periods were comforted and often fell back asleep more easily than if they had awakened during the deeper phases of adult sleep. After 1 to 3 hours of gentle wakefulness, the second sleep would begin. This period, lasting until dawn, was often described in historical records as deeper and more dream-filled than the first sleep. People would wake naturally with the sunrise, refreshed and alert, despite having been awake for several hours during the night. This segmented sleep pattern was perfectly adapted to the realities of Ice Age life. The midnight waking period allowed for fire maintenance without disrupting the deep rest that was crucial for physical recovery. It provided natural breaking points for night watch rotations. Most importantly, it created a rhythm that could accommodate the various interruptions that were inevitable in group sleeping situations. The seasonal variations in this sleep pattern were dramatic. In summer, with its brief nights and extended daylight, sleep might contract to just 4 or 5 hours of darkness, supplemented by daytime naps when the heat became oppressive. But winter sleep could expand to 10 or 12 hours, with the extended midnight waking period providing time for essential maintenance activities that couldn't be performed in the brief daylight hours. Modern sleep research has confirmed that this segmented pattern may be more natural to human biology than our current approach. When people are isolated from artificial light for extended periods, many naturally fall into biphasic sleep cycles similar to those of our ancestors. The universal experience of 3 a.m. insomnia may actually be our bodies trying to return to this ancient pattern. The quality of prehistoric sleep was likely superior to what most modern people experience. The complete darkness of winter nights allowed for full melatonin production, creating deeper sleep phases and more complete restoration. The absence of artificial stimulation meant that minds could fully disengage from daily concerns, sinking into the profound rest that only comes with true darkness. Dreams in this environment took on special significance. The extended dream periods of second sleep, combined with the quiet contemplation of midnight waking, created ideal conditions for the kind of vivid, memorable dreams that our ancestors interpreted as messages from spirits or glimpses of other worlds. Many of the myths and stories that formed the foundation of human culture may have originated in these extended dream periods. The social rhythms that developed around natural sleep patterns created strong community bonds. Families who shared the midnight waking period developed intimate knowledge of each other's thoughts, fears, and dreams. Children learned by listening to adult conversations during these quiet hours, absorbing cultural knowledge in a relaxed, receptive state. The transition between sleep and waking was gentler in this natural pattern. Without alarm clocks jarring people from deep sleep, awakening happened gradually as natural light increased and the fire was built up for the day's activities. This gentle transition helped prevent the grogginess and disorientation that plague many modern sleepers. Physical health benefited enormously from this natural sleep schedule. The extended rest periods allowed for complete muscle recovery from the demanding physical work of prehistoric life. The regular sleep-wake cycles helped regulate hormones, immune function, and cellular repair processes. The absence of artificial light kept circadian rhythms perfectly synchronized with natural cycles. But perhaps most importantly, this natural sleep pattern created psychological resilience that helped our ancestors cope with the stresses of their dangerous world. The quiet contemplation periods provided time for processing traumatic events, working through complex social dynamics, and maintaining the emotional balance necessary for group survival. Understanding these natural sleep rhythms helps explain how our ancestors could rest peacefully despite the genuine dangers surrounding them. Their sleep wasn't constantly interrupted by anxiety because it was designed to accommodate interruptions. It wasn't light and restless because their bodies were fully synchronized with natural darkness. It wasn't socially isolating because it created shared experiences that brought communities together. Yet even the most perfect sleep rhythm couldn't overcome one of the greatest challenges of Ice Age life: the gnawing hunger that could make even the most comfortable bedding feel like torture. The stomach's growl echoed off the cave walls like a distant predator's call. For our ancestors, hunger wasn't just discomfort. It was a sleep thief that could steal rest, when it was most desperately needed. During the leanest months of winter, when stored food ran low and hunting became nearly impossible, families faced nights where empty bellies competed with cold for their attention. Hunger changes everything about sleep. Modern science tells us that low blood sugar disrupts normal sleep cycles, reducing the deep sleep phases that are crucial for physical recovery. Our ancestors lived this reality without understanding the physiology behind it. They just knew that hungry nights were restless nights, filled with fitful dozing and frequent waking. The relationship between food and warmth was particularly cruel during winter. The human body burns calories to maintain temperature, but when calories were scarce, the internal furnace began to sputter. A person who was both hungry and cold faced a vicious cycle. They needed food to stay warm, but they needed warmth to sleep, and they needed sleep to have energy to find food. Children suffered most during these lean periods. Their smaller bodies had fewer fat reserves to draw upon, and their higher metabolisms burned through available energy faster than adults. Parents faced impossible choices: share their own meager portions and risk their ability to hunt and provide, or watch their children shiver through sleepless nights, growing weaker with each passing day. The strategies families developed to cope with hungry nights revealed both their desperation and their ingenuity. Meals were timed to provide maximum benefit for sleep. The small portions of fat and protein available were saved for evening consumption, providing slow-burning calories that could fuel the body's furnace through the longest, coldest hours. Bones became precious resources during these times. Long after the meat was gone, bones could be cracked open to reveal fatty marrow, a concentrated source of calories that could make the difference between a restless night and actual sleep. The archaeological record shows that Ice Age peoples cracked virtually every bone they could, extracting every possible bit of nutrition. Even the smallest scraps of food took on enormous importance. Bits of dried meat, hoarded nuts from autumn gathering, fat carefully scraped from hides, all became bedtime treasures that could quiet growling stomachs just enough to allow rest. Families developed systems for distributing these precious morsels, ensuring that the most vulnerable members got enough to sleep. The psychological effects of hunger on sleep were as challenging as the physical ones. Anxious thoughts about the next meal could keep minds racing long after bodies had found comfortable positions. Worry about the group's survival made it difficult to relax into the vulnerable state of sleep. Even when exhaustion finally won out, the sleep that came was light and troubled. Dreams during hungry periods often centered on food. Vivid fantasies of abundance, of successful hunts and plentiful gatherings provided psychological relief, but could also intensify the harsh reality of waking. Some of these hunger dreams may have inspired the myths of magical plenty that appear in many cultures, stories of lands where food was always available, where winter never came, where no one ever went to bed hungry. The social dynamics of hungry nights tested group bonds in fundamental ways. Food sharing became a measure of loyalty and love. Adults who gave their portions to children were demonstrating the deepest form of sacrifice. Conflicts over food distribution could fracture groups, while generous sharing could strengthen them beyond any other force. Hunger also changed the rhythm of winter nights. When food was plentiful, families might stay awake longer around the fire, enjoying social time and storytelling. Hungry nights encouraged earlier sleep, conserving energy, and avoiding the mental torture of sitting awake with empty stomachs. The midnight waking periods might be shortened to reduce the time spent consciously experiencing hunger pangs. The night watch during lean periods carried additional burdens. Guards had to resist the temptation to eat emergency food stores, maintaining discipline when their own bodies were crying out for sustenance. They also had to listen more carefully for signs of successful late-night scavenging opportunities, the sounds of predators making kills that humans might be able to claim. Interestingly, some aspects of sleep improved during periods of mild hunger. Bodies that weren't expending energy on digestion might achieve deeper rest once sleep finally came. The absence of full stomachs made it easier to curl into space-saving positions that maximized warmth, and the heightened awareness that came with hunger could actually help with the light sleeping necessary for survival. But severe hunger was always dangerous. Bodies weakened by starvation were more vulnerable to cold, more susceptible to illness, and less capable of the physical exertion needed for hunting and gathering. Groups that couldn't solve their food problems faced a downward spiral where hunger made hunting less successful, which led to more hunger and even poorer sleep. The strategies that worked best combined practical food management with psychological coping mechanisms. Rationing systems ensured that available food was distributed to maximize the group's sleep quality. Storytelling traditions helped distract minds from hunger pangs. Ritual activities, prayer, meditation, or simple breathing exercises, provided alternative focuses for attention. Some groups may have developed seasonal fasting practices that prepared bodies and minds for periods of scarcity. By occasionally practicing voluntary hunger during times of plenty, they could train themselves to sleep despite empty stomachs, building resilience for the lean times that were sure to come. The memory of hungry nights shaped cultural practices long after the immediate crisis passed. Successful groups developed food preservation techniques, storage strategies, and sharing customs that reduced the likelihood of severe shortages. The fear of hungry sleep may have been one of the driving forces behind human innovation in food technology. Even in the depths of hunger-driven insomnia, our ancestors found ways to endure. They discovered that sleep, however light and troubled, was still better than no sleep at all. They learned that sharing misery could make it more bearable, that hope for better times could sustain them through the worst nights, and that even hungry sleep could restore enough strength to face another day. But hunger wasn't the only force that could shatter the peace of prehistoric sleep. Nature itself could turn violent without warning, transforming safe shelters into death traps and turning restful nights into battles for survival. The wind arrived first, a low moan that penetrated even the deepest caves and set everyone instantly alert. Within hours, that moan became a shriek that rattled bone huts and drove snow horizontally through any opening. This was how blizzards announced themselves in the Ice Age world, not as weather events, but as potential executioners that could trap families for days and test every survival strategy they possessed. Sleeping through a major storm required completely different tactics than surviving ordinary winter nights. The familiar rhythms of shared warmth and rotating watch duties suddenly became insufficient against nature's full fury. Families had to adapt quickly or risk being buried alive, suffocated by smoke, or frozen by the massive temperature drops that accompanied the worst weather. The sound alone was enough to prevent normal sleep. In caves, wind found every crack and crevice, creating whistles, moans, and howls that could be heard over the fire's crackling. The acoustic properties that made caves good for storytelling and singing became nightmarish during storms, amplifying every gust into a symphony of terror that could keep even exhausted adults awake through sheer anxiety. Bone huts faced even greater challenges. The carefully constructed mammoth bone frameworks that provided excellent insulation during calm weather could become death traps when hurricane-force winds tested their structural integrity. Families huddled inside could hear the bones creaking and shifting, never knowing if the next gust might collapse their shelter entirely. Fire management during storms became a desperate balancing act. Winds could blow through cave entrances and scatter embers dangerously, threatening to ignite bedding or clothing. But allowing the fire to die meant certain death from cold. The person on fire duty during a storm carried enormous responsibility, constantly adjusting the fire's size and position to maintain heat while preventing disaster. Smoke became a serious hazard during major weather events. The air currents that normally carried smoke out of caves could reverse during storms, filling shelters with choking fumes. Families sometimes had to choose between freezing and suffocating, making quick decisions about whether to seal entrances against wind or leave them open for ventilation. The duration of major storms could be as challenging as their intensity. A blizzard might last 3 days or more, trapping families in confined spaces with limited food, fuel, and sanitation options. Sleep became both more necessary to conserve energy during enforced inactivity and more difficult due to stress, discomfort, and the constant noise of wind and weather. Children required special management during storm nights. The terrifying sounds and obvious adult anxiety could trigger panic that made sleep impossible. Parents developed techniques for creating calm in the midst of chaos, storytelling that competed with wind noise, games that distracted from the storm's fury, and physical comfort that reassured frightened children that they were safe. Food rationing during extended storms created additional sleep challenges. Families never knew how long they might be trapped, so they had to balance the need for energy to stay warm against the possibility of supplies running out before the storm ended. Hungry bellies made sleep more difficult, but overindulging early in a storm could prove fatal if the weather lasted longer than expected. Some storms brought additional dangers beyond wind and cold. Ice storms could seal cave entrances, requiring dangerous excavation work to prevent suffocation. Flash floods from rapidly melting snow could turn dry caves into deadly traps. Avalanches triggered by wind and temperature changes could bury entire settlements without warning. The psychological pressure of storm nights was immense. Adults had to maintain calm leadership while facing genuinely life-threatening conditions. The normal comfort of routine was stripped away, replaced by constant vigilance and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Decision-making became crucial: when to risk leaving shelter for fuel or food, whether to attempt moving to better locations, how to ration supplies for unknown duration. Yet storms also brought unexpected opportunities for bonding. Families trapped together for days had extended time for conversation, storytelling, and intimate connection that normal survival schedules didn't permit. Some of humanity's most important cultural developments may have occurred during storm-enforced gatherings, when people had time to develop complex language, art, and social customs. The end of a major storm brought its own challenges for sleep. Digging out from snow accumulation required enormous physical effort. Assessing and repairing storm damage to shelters consumed energy that exhausted people desperately needed for rest. But there was also profound relief. The return of normal sounds, the ability to tend fires properly, and the knowledge that they had survived nature's worst assault. Groups that successfully weathered major storms often developed improved survival strategies for future events. They learned to recognize weather signs that predicted severe conditions, allowing better preparation. They modified their shelters to better handle wind and snow, Most importantly, they developed social protocols that helped maintain group cohesion during the stress of extended confinement. The memory of storm survival became part of cultural knowledge, passed down through stories that taught preparation and response techniques. Children who lived through major storms learned lessons about resource management, group cooperation, and personal resilience that served them throughout their lives. Archaeological evidence from storm-damaged sites shows that some groups didn't survive these encounters with nature's fury. Collapsed bone huts, charcoal layers interrupted by flood deposits, and signs of hasty abandonment tell stories of families overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. But the evidence also shows remarkable resilience. Sites that were rebuilt, modified, and reoccupied after disasters. The relationship between humans and weather in the Ice Age was fundamentally different from our modern experience. Today, we view storms as inconveniences that disrupt our schedules. For our ancestors, they were existential tests that determined who lived and who died. Sleep during these events wasn't about comfort. It was about conserving the energy needed to survive until the storm passed and normal life could resume. But even when storms weren't raging, the night world of our ancestors was far from quiet. The acoustic environment of caves and shelters created unique challenges and opportunities that shaped how people rested and dreamed. Sound traveled strangely in the limestone chambers where our ancestors sought shelter from winter's fury. A whisper at one end of a cave could become clearly audible at the other, while a shout might seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. For families trying to sleep in these natural amphitheaters, the acoustic properties of their homes created a unique soundscape that shaped their rest in ways we can barely imagine today. Every breath became public in the echoing chambers. The soft inhalation of sleeping children, the deeper breathing of adults, even the subtle shifts in breathing pattern that indicated someone was waking. All of these sounds were amplified and reflected by the stone walls until they became part of the night's symphony. Privacy, as we understand it, was acoustically impossible. The fire's crackling took on new dimensions in cave acoustics. Each pop and hiss was multiplied by echoes, creating layers of sound that could be both comforting and overwhelming. Wood fires produced different acoustic signatures than bone fires. Pine created sharp snaps while oak provided steady crackling. Families became so attuned to their fire's sound that changes in the acoustic pattern could wake them instantly, alerting them to problems with fuel or airflow. Predator sounds from outside underwent strange transformations as they entered caves. A wolf's howl might seem to come from multiple directions simultaneously as echoes bounced off various surfaces. The padding of large paws on snow could be amplified until it sounded like an entire pack approaching, creating false alarms that disrupted sleep and wasted precious energy on unnecessary vigilance. But the acoustic properties of caves also provided advantages for prehistoric families. The amplification effect meant that one person's voice could reach everyone in the shelter, making it possible to share stories, warnings, or comfort without shouting. A parent could soothe a frightened child from across the cave, their whispered reassurances carried clearly through the chamber. The echoing environment created natural early warning systems. Sounds from cave entrances were amplified and reflected throughout the interior, giving sleeping families advance notice of approaching dangers. The scrape of claws on stone, the rustle of vegetation being disturbed, or the crunch of footsteps in snow all announced themselves long before visual contact was possible. Different types of caves produced different acoustic signatures that affected sleep quality. Deep, narrow caves created more intense echoes that could be disturbing to light sleepers. Wider chambers with higher ceilings produced softer, more diffused sound reflection that many found more comfortable for rest. Families learned to evaluate caves not just for protection and warmth, but for their sonic properties. The sounds of sleep itself became a form of communication in these echoing environments. Experienced adults could distinguish between the breathing patterns of peaceful sleep, restless dreaming, and awakening awareness. Parents could monitor their children's sleep quality by listening to subtle changes in breathing rhythm or movement sounds that indicated comfort or distress. Snoring presented particular challenges in cave acoustics. What might be a minor annoyance in open air became a major disruption when amplified by stone walls. Groups had to develop strategies for dealing with loud sleepers, positioning them away from others when possible, or learning techniques to minimize the acoustic impact of their nighttime breathing patterns. The echo effects could also mask important sounds. Distinguishing between internal cave noises and external threats became a crucial skill for night guards. The sound of someone turning in their sleep could be confused with the movement of an intruder. Dripping water could mask the approach of predators. Learning to read the acoustic environment correctly was literally a matter of life and death. Weather conditions outside significantly affected the acoustic properties inside caves. Wind could create complex sound patterns as air moved through multiple cave openings. Rain produced its own symphony of drips and flows as water found its way through cracks in the ceiling. Snow had a muffling effect that changed the cave's acoustic signature, sometimes providing blessed quiet, but also reducing the effectiveness of the natural early warning system. Some caves produced sounds without any external cause. The settlement of rock formations, the movement of underground water, or the expansion and contraction of stone due to temperature changes. These mysterious sounds had to be learned and categorized so they wouldn't trigger false alarms. Families became acoustic experts on their particular caves, able to distinguish between normal cave sounds and genuine alerts. The acoustic environment may have influenced the development of human language and music. Caves that produced particularly pleasing echo effects might have encouraged experimentation with vocal sounds, leading to the development of singing, chanting, or complex storytelling traditions. The need to communicate clearly in echoing environments may have shaped the evolution of human speech patterns. Children growing up in these acoustic environments developed exceptional hearing abilities. They learned to locate sounds precisely despite echo confusion, to distinguish between similar sounds that indicated different levels of threat, and to use their voices effectively in the challenging acoustic space. These skills served them well throughout their lives, making them more effective hunters, guards, and communicators. The darkness of caves intensified the importance of acoustic information. When visual cues were limited or absent, sound became the primary sense for understanding the environment. Families developed sophisticated systems for interpreting the acoustic landscape, recognizing the footsteps of each family member, identifying the approach of familiar or strange animals, and even predicting weather changes based on how sound traveled through their shelter. Modern acoustic research in ancient caves has revealed that some chambers have remarkable sound properties that may have been deliberately chosen by prehistoric inhabitants. Certain caves amplify human voices at specific frequencies while dampening others, creating natural acoustic environments that enhanced communication and possibly ritual activities. But perhaps the most profound effect of cave acoustics on sleep was psychological. The constant presence of reflected sound created a sense of enclosure and intimacy that could be both comforting and claustrophobic. For some, the acoustic cocoon of the cave provided security and warmth. For others, The inability to escape sound created stress that made rest difficult. The sounds of cave sleep, breath and heartbeat amplified by stone, fire crackling in multiple echoes, the distant call of wind through hidden passages, created a unique acoustic signature for Ice Age rest. It was sleep accompanied by a symphony of survival, where every sound told a story, and silence itself was never truly silent. These acoustic challenges were just one aspect of how the environment shaped prehistoric dreams and fears, contributing to the birth of humanity's first nightmares and the mythological creatures that still haunt our imagination today. In the absolute darkness beyond the fire's reach, shadows moved with lives of their own. The flickering flames threw dancing shapes on cave walls, transforming natural rock formations into writhing creatures that seemed to watch sleeping families with eyes of shadow. This was where humanity's first nightmares were born, not in safe bedrooms with nightlights, but in caves where the monsters of imagination could seem terrifyingly real. The prehistoric mind lived in a world where the line between reality and nightmare was dangerously thin. Every unexplained sound could be a predator. Every shadow could hide death. Every strange dream might be a warning from spirits or ancestors. In an environment where genuine dangers lurked in every dark corner, the imagination didn't need to work hard to create terror. Children were particularly vulnerable to the fears that darkness spawned. Growing up in a world where wolves howled outside their sleeping area and cave bears had been known to claim human shelters, they had legitimate reasons for nighttime anxiety. The monsters under the bed weren't imaginary. They were real creatures that could kill entire families if the fire went out or the night watch failed. But fear served important survival functions in the prehistoric world. Children who were afraid to wander away from the fire's protection were children who stayed alive. Adults who startled awake at unusual sounds were adults who could respond quickly to genuine threats. The psychological response systems that we now call anxiety and phobias were finely tuned survival mechanisms in an environment where paranoia could be life-saving. The stories told around fires before sleep served multiple purposes in managing these fears. Surface stories entertained and educated, but deeper purposes included helping people process their anxieties about the dangers they faced. By giving shape and narrative to their fears, families could discuss survival strategies while maintaining the social bonds that kept groups together. Dream interpretation became a crucial survival skill. In a world where every sensory input could contain vital information, dreams were treated as another source of potentially life-saving knowledge. A dream about a bear might be interpreted as a warning to check cave entrances more carefully. A nightmare about falling might suggest the need to secure sleeping areas better against rockfalls. The acoustic properties of caves contributed significantly to nightmare creation. Echoing sounds that were difficult to locate or identify fed anxious imaginations. The breathing of sleeping family members could be transformed by tired minds into the approach of predators. Water dripping in hidden passages could become the footsteps of unseen threats stalking through the darkness. Fire played a complex role in both creating and dispelling nightmares. The comforting light provided psychological security and made sleep possible, but the dancing flames also created moving shadows that could trigger fear responses. The crackling sounds masked other noises, providing both comfort and anxiety as people wondered what sounds they might not be hearing. Starvation intensified nightmare experiences. Hungry, minds were more prone to hallucinations and disturbing dreams. The physiological stress of food scarcity affected brain chemistry in ways that made sleep more restless and dreams more vivid and threatening. Some of the most terrifying monsters in human mythology may have originated in the fever dreams of starvation. The communal nature of prehistoric sleep meant that nightmares were often shared experiences. When one person cried out in their sleep, others would wake to comfort them. This created opportunities for dream sharing and interpretation that strengthened group bonds while also potentially spreading anxiety. A particularly vivid nightmare might be discussed and analyzed by the entire group, becoming part of their collective mythology. Different types of dreams were categorized and understood according to their perceived importance for group survival. Dreams about successful hunts might be seen as prophecies worth acting upon. Nightmares about disasters could trigger practical preparations for potential dangers. Dreams about deceased family members might be interpreted as messages from ancestors, carrying wisdom crucial for current survival challenges. The development of spiritual beliefs may have been directly connected to nightmare experiences. When faced with terrifying dreams that felt more real than waking life, prehistoric minds needed explanations that made sense within their understanding of the world. Spirits, demons, and supernatural entities provided frameworks for understanding experiences that were too intense and meaningful to dismiss as random brain activity. Seasonal variations in nightmare frequency and intensity reflected the changing stresses of Ice Age life. Winter dreams might focus on freezing, starvation, or being trapped in collapsing shelters. Summer dreams could involve different threats: floods, wildfires, or encounters with dangerous animals during extended daylight hunting periods. The content of nightmares served as a psychological rehearsal for real dangers that varied with the seasons. Group responses to nightmares revealed sophisticated understanding of psychological support systems. When someone experienced particularly disturbing dreams, the group might adjust sleeping arrangements to provide more security. Extra attention might be paid to the dreamer's comfort and safety. Ritual activities might be performed to address the spiritual concerns that the nightmare seemed to represent. The role of nightmare experiences in developing human empathy and social bonds was significant. Comforting someone through a terrifying dream required understanding their fear and providing effective emotional support. Children who were soothed through nightmares by caring adults learned patterns of compassion that would serve them throughout their lives. Some nightmares may have contributed to survival by processing traumatic experiences in ways that helped people cope with ongoing threats. Dreams about past dangerous encounters could help minds rehearse better responses for future similar situations. Even terrifying nightmares served the function of keeping survival instincts sharp and alert. The archaeological evidence for prehistoric spiritual beliefs, cave paintings, carved figures, burial customs, may reflect attempts to address the fears and anxieties that plagued prehistoric sleep. Rituals performed before bedtime, protective symbols placed near sleeping areas, and ceremonies designed to appease potentially threatening spirits all suggest sophisticated approaches to managing the psychological challenges of sleeping in a dangerous world. The legacy of these prehistoric nightmares lives on in modern sleep patterns and cultural traditions. Our instinctive fear of darkness, our need for night lights, our tendency to imagine threats in unfamiliar nighttime environments, all echo the survival mechanisms developed by ancestors who faced genuine monsters in the dark. Understanding prehistoric nightmares helps us appreciate how closely connected fear and survival were in the ancient world. What we might dismiss as irrational anxieties were actually finely tuned warning systems that kept our ancestors alive through countless dangerous nights. The monsters they imagined in flickering firelight were preparing them for the real dangers that waited just beyond the cave mouth. But these ancient fears also gave birth to humanity's greatest strengths: the ability to imagine, to create stories, to find meaning in experience, and to support each other through the darkest moments. In learning to cope with nightmares together, our ancestors laid the foundation for the complex emotional and cultural systems that define human civilization. Yet, for all the fears that haunted prehistoric sleep, archaeological evidence reveals that our ancestors were remarkably successful at creating rest and comfort even in the harshest conditions. Their solutions to the challenges of winter sleep offer lessons that remain relevant today. As we emerge from the caves and shelters of our ancestors, returning to our world of central heating and memory foam mattresses, a profound realization settles in. Despite all our technological advances, we may have lost some crucial wisdom about what it means to truly rest. The archaeological evidence scattered across ancient sites tells a story not just of survival, but of ingenuity, community, and a deep understanding of sleep's role in human flourishing. The bedding systems our ancestors developed rival modern engineering in their sophistication. Layers of carefully selected plants provided natural pest control, moisture management, and insulation that would impress contemporary outdoor gear designers. The multi-layer approach using different animal hides created temperature regulation systems that adapted automatically to changing conditions. Thicker layers trapped more heat when needed, while individual components could be added or removed as circumstances required. Modern sleep science has validated many of the strategies that Ice Age peoples discovered through necessity. The practice of sleeping in complete darkness, uninterrupted by artificial light, allowed for optimal melatonin production and deeper sleep cycles. Contemporary researchers studying the effects of light pollution on sleep have rediscovered what our ancestors never forgot: that true darkness is essential for restorative rest. The segmented sleep patterns that archaeological evidence suggests were normal for prehistoric peoples have been confirmed by modern studies as potentially more natural to human biology than our current 8-hour blocks. When volunteers are isolated from artificial light and allowed to sleep according to their natural rhythms, many develop the biphasic pattern, 2 periods of sleep separated by quiet wakefulness that may have been standard for thousands of years. The social aspects of prehistoric sleep offer particularly valuable insights for our increasingly isolated modern world. The shared responsibility for nighttime safety, the communal warmth that made survival possible, and the intimate conversations that occurred during midnight waking periods all contributed to social bonds that were literally life-sustaining. Modern research on loneliness and its health impacts suggests we may have lost something crucial when we moved to individual bedrooms and isolated sleep. Fire management techniques developed by our ancestors contain lessons for contemporary life that go beyond mere temperature control. The careful attention to fuel selection, the understanding of how different materials burned at different rates, and the rotation of responsibility for maintaining warmth through the night all demonstrate principles of resource management and shared responsibility that could benefit modern communities. The acoustic awareness that cave dwelling required developed sensory skills that modern people have largely lost. Our ancestors could distinguish between dozens of different sounds in the dark, identifying threats, weather changes, and the subtle signs of their family's well-being through audio cues alone. In our world of constant electronic noise, we've lost much of this acoustic sensitivity, potentially missing important environmental and social information. The relationship between seasonal light patterns and sleep that governed prehistoric rest cycles offers insights into managing seasonal mood disorders and optimizing energy levels throughout the year. Instead of fighting against natural rhythms with artificial light and rigid schedules, our ancestors embraced seasonal variations in sleep duration and timing, allowing their bodies to synchronize with natural cycles in ways that supported both physical and mental health. The food timing strategies that helped prehistoric families maximize warmth and sleep quality despite limited resources contain principles that modern nutrition research has validated. Eating fat and protein in the evening provided slow-burning fuel for overnight temperature regulation. The practice of saving the most calorie-dense foods for bedtime consumption helped ensure that the body's furnace had adequate fuel for the long night ahead. Perhaps most importantly, the communal approach to managing sleep challenges offered psychological benefits that our individualistic culture struggles to replicate. When nightmares struck, community support was immediately available. When someone was cold, others shared their warmth without question. When dangers threatened, the group responded as one. This interconnectedness created resilience that no individual could achieve alone. The archaeological record also reveals the sophisticated understanding our ancestors had of their environment's impact on sleep quality. Cave selection criteria that balanced protection, ventilation, acoustics, and proximity to resources demonstrate environmental awareness that could inform modern building design and bedroom optimization. The attention to air quality, temperature control, and noise management shows that good sleep environments were recognized as crucial for survival. The integration of spiritual and practical approaches to sleep challenges offers insights that extend beyond mere survival techniques. The use of ritual and story to process fears, the interpretation of dreams as potentially meaningful information, and the creation of meaning around the shared experience of rest all contributed to psychological well-being that supported physical survival. Modern applications of these ancient insights don't require abandoning contemporary comforts, but they do suggest ways to improve our relationship with sleep and rest. Creating darker sleeping environments, paying attention to seasonal variations in sleep needs, developing stronger social connections around bedtime routines, and treating sleep as a community concern rather than an individual challenge could all enhance our rest and overall well-being. The temperature regulation strategies of our ancestors offer lessons for managing energy costs and environmental impact while improving sleep quality. Layering systems that trap and redirect body heat, the use of thermal mass to store and slowly release warmth, and the strategic positioning of heat sources all demonstrate principles that could inform both architectural design and personal sleep optimization. The story of caveman sleep ultimately reveals that our ancestors were not primitive survivors scratching out a miserable existence, but sophisticated engineers of comfort who developed complex systems for managing one of life's most fundamental needs. Their solutions were elegant, effective, and deeply human, creating not just survival, but genuine rest and community in the face of impossible challenges. As we face our own challenges, climate change, social isolation, sleep disorders, and the stresses of modern life, the wisdom embedded in those ancient sleeping arrangements offers more than historical curiosity. It provides a roadmap for creating rest that is not just individual recovery time, but a foundation for community, resilience, and human flourishing. The fires in those caves went out long ago, but the warmth they created, both physical and social, continues to glow in the archaeological record. Their light illuminates not just how our ancestors survived the coldest nights in human history, but how they transformed survival into something approaching art, creating spaces of warmth, safety, and love in the heart of an unforgiving world. In learning how they slept, we discover not just techniques for staying warm, but blueprints for staying human. And perhaps that is the most valuable legacy they left us, the understanding that even in the darkest nights, we need never face the cold alone. The cave is silent now except for the whisper of wind through ancient stone. The fires that once danced on these walls have been cold for 40,000 years. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echoes of their warmth. The soft breathing of children pressed close to parents, the crackle of carefully tended flames, the quiet murmur of voices sharing stories in the deep night. Our ancestors faced winters that could kill with a single mistake, nights that lasted 19 hours, and predators that saw humans as prey. Yet they didn't just survive. They created the first bedrooms in human history. They engineered systems of warmth, safety, and comfort that allowed them to rest deeply despite dangers we can hardly imagine. They discovered that survival was never individual, that the warmest bed was one shared with family, that the safest sleep came when someone else stayed awake to tend the fire. They learned that even in the coldest darkness, humans could create islands of warmth and light that transformed caves into homes. Their solutions were not primitive, but profound, not desperate, but elegant. Layer by layer, they built comfort from the materials their world provided. Person by person, they created communities that could endure anything winter brought. Night by night, they proved that even when faced with impossible odds, humans could find ways not just to survive, but to dream. In their story, we find our own. Every time we pull blankets close, gather with family, or find comfort in shared warmth, we echo the nights they spent pressed together under mammoth hides. Every time we tend a fire or light a candle against the dark, we honor their understanding that light and warmth are not just physical necessities, but symbols of hope itself. The Ice Age ended, but the wisdom remains. In caves and shelters across the ancient world, our ancestors wrote the first chapters of the human story of rest. And in that story, the most important lesson is the simplest. No one survives winter alone. The fire may have gone out in those caves long ago, but the warmth they created, the warmth of human connection, ingenuity, and shared survival, burns on in every comfortable night's sleep, in every family gathered close, in every moment when we choose community over isolation and hope over fear. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you carry within you the dreams of those who faced the longest nights and found ways to fill them with warmth, safety, and love.